The Vietnam War was a long and complex conflict. It lasted from 1955 to 1975. The war pitted North Vietnam against South Vietnam and its main ally, the United States. It was a brutal and divisive struggle. The conflict had far-reaching consequences for all involved. The war began as a civil conflict in Vietnam. It soon became a proxy war between global superpowers. The United States supported South Vietnam. China and the Soviet Union backed North Vietnam. The war escalated over time. It drew in more countries and resources. The Vietnam War was not just a military conflict. It was also a political and social upheaval. The war affected millions of lives. It shaped international relations for decades. It left deep scars on the American psyche. The war also transformed Vietnamese society. This essay will explore the Vietnam War in detail. We'll look at its causes, major events, and impacts. We'll examine the war's effects on both Vietnam and the United States. We'll also consider its long-term legacy. Understanding this war is crucial for grasping modern history. The roots of the Vietnam War stretch back to the 1800s. France colonized Vietnam in the 19th century. The Vietnamese resisted French rule for decades. World War II disrupted French control. Japan occupied Vietnam during the war. This occupation ended with Japan's defeat in 1945. After World War II, Vietnam declared independence. Ho Chi Minh led this movement. France tried to regain control. This led to the First Indochina War from 1946 to 1954. The Vietnamese defeated the French at Dien Bien Phu. This battle ended French colonial rule in Vietnam. The Geneva Accords of 1954 divided Vietnam. The country was split at the 17th parallel. North Vietnam was led by communists. South Vietnam had a non-communist government. This division was meant to be temporary. Elections were planned to reunify the country. The United States feared communist expansion. They supported the South Vietnamese government. The U.S. sent advisors and aid to South Vietnam. North Vietnam backed communist rebels in the south. These rebels were called the Viet Cong. Tensions grew between North and South. This set the stage for a larger conflict. The Vietnam War began gradually. North Vietnam supported insurgents in the south. These guerrilla fighters were called the Viet Cong. The U.S. sent more military advisors. President Kennedy increased U.S. involvement. North Vietnamese boats allegedly attacked U.S. ships. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. Johnson ordered the first combat troops to Vietnam. Operation Rolling Thunder was a massive air campaign. The war was now in full swing. The Vietnam War saw many significant battles. One of the first was the Battle of Ia Drang in 1965. It was the first major engagement between U.S. and North Vietnamese forces. The battle showed the challenges of fighting in Vietnam. It set the tone for much of the war. The Tet Offensive of 1968 was a turning point. North Vietnam and the Viet Cong launched surprise attacks. They struck cities and towns across South Vietnam. The offensive was a military failure for the North, but it was a psychological victory. It shook American confidence in the war. Another key battle was Khe Sanh in 1968. U.S. Marines defended this base for months. They faced constant attacks from North Vietnamese forces. The siege of Khe Sanh became a symbol of the war's brutality. It showed the determination of both sides. The Easter Offensive of 1972 was North Vietnam's largest operation. They invaded South Vietnam with a conventional army. The South Vietnamese, with U.S. air support, eventually halted the offensive. This battle showed the growing strength of the North Vietnamese army. It also highlighted the South's dependence on U.S. support. Section 5. The role of technology and tactics. The Vietnam War saw the use of advanced military technology. The U.S. employed helicopters extensively. They used them for troop transport, supply, and combat. This gave U.S. forces mobility in difficult terrain. Helicopters became a symbol of the American war effort. Both sides used guerrilla warfare tactics. The Viet Cong were experts at ambushes and booby traps. They used the dense jungle to their advantage. U.S. and South Vietnamese forces struggled to combat these tactics. They developed search and destroy missions to find the enemy. The U.S. also used controversial chemical weapons. Agent Orange was a defoliant. It was used to strip away jungle cover. This chemical had devastating long-term health effects. It harmed both Vietnamese civilians and U.S. veterans. Air power played a crucial role in the war. The U.S. conducted massive bombing campaigns. They targeted North Vietnam and supply lines. The famous Ho Chi Minh Trail was a frequent target. This network of paths supplied the Viet Cong. Despite intense bombing, the trail remained operational throughout the war. Section 6. Political impact on Vietnam. The Vietnam War deeply affected Vietnamese politics. In the north, the war strengthened the communist government. Leaders like Ho Chi Minh became national heroes. The war effort united the North Vietnamese people. It reinforced their commitment to reunification. In South Vietnam, the war caused political instability. The government in Saigon faced constant challenges. There were numerous coups and changes in leadership. The most notable was the overthrow of President Ngo Dinh Diem in 1963. This instability weakened South Vietnam's war effort. The war also affected Vietnam's relationships with other countries. China and the Soviet Union supported North Vietnam. This strengthened communist ties, but it also led to tensions between these allies. South Vietnam became increasingly dependent on US support. This dependence shaped its foreign policy. The war's end in 1975 led to major political changes. North Vietnam's victory resulted in reunification. The country became the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. This marked the end of the divide between North and South. It also led to significant political repression. Many South Vietnamese officials and supporters faced persecution. Section 7. Social and cultural effects in the United States. The Vietnam War had profound effects on American society. It sparked widespread protests. Anti-war movements grew across the country. College campuses became centers of dissent. The war divided American public opinion. It created a generation gap between young people and their parents. The draft system was particularly controversial. It disproportionately affected lower-income and minority communities. Many young men fled to Canada to avoid the draft. Others chose to serve despite their doubts. This created tension and moral dilemmas for many families. The media played a crucial role during the war. Television brought the conflict into American homes. Graphic images of combat shocked viewers. Reporters questioned official accounts of the war. This led to a credibility gap between the government and the public. Trust in institutions declined. The war also influenced American culture. It inspired countless books, movies, and songs. Many of these were critical of the war. They reflected the nation's growing disillusionment. The war became a symbol of government deception. It challenged America's view of itself as a global force for good. Section 8. The war's end and immediate aftermath. The Vietnam War ended in 1975. North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon. The fall of Saigon was chaotic. Many South Vietnamese fled. Vietnam faced enormous challenges. Infrastructure was destroyed. The economy was in ruins. The fall of Saigon was a blow to American prestige. The U.S. struggled with the war's legacy. Veterans faced hostility or indifference. Section 9. Long-term consequences and legacy. The Vietnam War's effects lasted long after its end. In Vietnam, the war's legacy is complex. Vietnam began economic reforms in the 1980s. Today, it has a growing economy. For the United States, the war changed foreign policy. It created a Vietnam syndrome. This made Americans wary of foreign military interventions. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial lists over 58,000 names.